Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Artaxis event, and I've been given something to read to you first before we get into the questions. And that is to say thank you for participating in this 12-hour event hosted by Artaxis in conjunction with National Clay Week in the United States. I am one of the 24 artists answering questions today on the Artaxis Facebook page. This event consists of 24 back-to-back 30-minute conversations by Artaxis members answering questions submitted over the past several weeks on the artaxis.org website. Artaxis is a non-profit art organization that promotes the professional pursuits of artists in the ceramic field and helps to advance the field as a whole. You can find out more about our organization and see my own artist page on artaxis.org. So, my name is Phil Rogers. I live in the middle of Wales, right in the middle of Wales, whichever way you look at it, we're right in the middle, amongst some beautiful countryside and on the banks of the River Wye. My pottery is an old 18th century stone cowhouse that I converted, and the kilns are in other stone buildings that were once part of a very large farm. So let's move straight into the questions. The first question I have is from Luke Nadinger. I hope I'm saying that right. And he asks, how is working, no, sorry, wrong one. In a documentary video done with Goldmark Gallery, he says that I spoke briefly about certain types of contemporary pottery, mostly urban, being better off made in a factory, specifically due to their lack of adventure. Would you care to speak more to what a sense of adventure means to you and your life and work? Well, yes, I think I can only speak really about this country. And there has been a movement away from the sort of potter that I am, that is a potter who lives and works in the countryside and uses kilns that burn fuels, wood, oil, gas, whatever, mostly wood and oil, where I mix my own clay, mix my own glazes, find local materials to make glazes with, and so on. And those sorts of potters, and I can name maybe 4 or 5 who are still very active in that sort of area. There's Mike Dodd, Jim Malone, and so on. And there has been a movement away from that to potters who tend to work in an urban atmosphere or urban environment. And again, I have to be careful what I say here. I see a lot of rather boring sort of celadon glazed or white glazed porcelain. That is, as I said, I would feel better made in a factory, because the sort of material and the sort of pots that they are don't particularly lend themselves to being handmade. And often the makers are not actually quite good enough to pull it off in a way. So there has been one particularly successful potter in this country who a lot of people have kind of followed. They've seen the success and they've followed that path. And I think it's a shame, because I think the pots generally, to want to put a, not to be too strong upon it, I just find them boring. And I feel, when I said that they don't have a sense of adventure, what I'm trying to get across is that I like to see pots that it's quite obvious that the potter has really stretched himself or herself. And there has been that element of risk of failure. And I just feel that there are too many pots at the moment which have this sort of rather banal white porcelain not terribly well made, and lack that integrity and sense of adventure that I feel good pots should have. Pots should be a celebration of clay and glaze. And we're going to come on to another question later about whether people who buy our pots actually need them anymore. And I think that that is tied up with this question, in that for people buying our pots, they need to feel deep connection, not just with the pot and with the potter, but also they need to feel that what they're buying is an expression of a potter's art, and not just a teacup or a cup or a jug that doesn't say anything. This is a really tricky question to answer. Let me get on to the second question, and I think we'll tie the two together. This is from Adam Welsh. Sven Bayer recently said about pottery, and he quotes, that Sven says that I am making stuff that no one actually needs. It's all based on functional pottery, which had a use once. My pots could be sold, and it does not solid rather, sorry, and it does not really matter. I'm just sort of saying goodbye to, and I cannot quite let go of this romantic idea I had when I started. It was like duplicating something that actually had already disappeared. And I totally understand what he's saying, and I've said much the same myself. But people who buy our pots don't actually need them. There are cheaper, more effective alternatives, plastic, metal, whatever. And the reason people buy our pots is not because they want to use them necessarily, although it's obviously nice when they do, and lots of people do use them, but it's not a necessity. But I do feel that pots that have a contemplative role, that is their function, and that function is as important as a pot that pours or a pot that you drink from. The pot that sits on a shelf or on the mantle, that you pass by every day, that enhances your environment, is every bit as important as the one that we use in the kitchen or on the table. I truly believe that. And I see pots in no different way to a painting or a sculpture. And often there is more to see in a good pot than there is in a painting or a sculpture. The one big advantage is, of course, that we can pick them up and handle them and turn them around. And we can't really do that with a painting. But I do really feel that pots should be shown alongside the very best of what is normally called fine art. Although, you know, there's a very grey area between the two disciplines. But, you know, I've tried for years, and I work with a gallery in this country called Goldmark, who incidentally have a wonderful website and lots of films. It's a great resource if you want to look at films about potters. And Mike Goldmark and myself have had this discussion many times about how we can show the best of ceramics, the best of pottery, not just British, but internationally, alongside the best of two-dimensional and three-dimensional fine art. And we do that all the time, and it works. It works very, very well, and people appreciate. At the moment, there's an exhibition at the gallery of Lee Kang-yo, the Korean potter, and his pots are incredible canvases, and they work and talk in just the same way as the very best paintings do. There's a lot to see and a lot to discover, and that's something that pots that I like in a pot is that I don't particularly like pots that tell me everything the first time I see them or handle them. I like pots that tell me something over a very long period, and every time I pick them up, perhaps I'll see something different. So pots can be a discovery, and that's part of this business of the sense of adventure, if you like, that I want to see pots that that talk to me, but don't tell me everything all at once, if that makes sense. Let's try another question. This is from Melanie Sherman. How is working in ceramics different here in the US versus your home country? Where do you see more opportunities for residencies, exhibitions, communities? Melanie Sherman. How long have we got? I think that I've been to the United States many times and traveled around a bit, and one or two of my best friends are American potters, and so I have a little bit of experience of how it is in America, although I'm not going to try and be an expert by any standards. The one thing I notice is that potters in America tend to sell their pots too cheaply. And I've had this discussion with a lot of American potters, and I'm often amazed at how inexpensive pots are in America. I'm not sure what the reasons are. We've talked around it, and there are theories, but whatever the theories are, I think that often I see pots in galleries for very, very small amounts of money. And when you think that the potter is only going to be getting a share of that price, it kind of makes it worse. In this country, we have developed a very committed audience for studio pottery. It's a fairly small audience, but it's a niche thing. But the ones who are committed truly understand about paying a proper price for a good pot. And I've been a potter now, this is my 40th year. At the end of this year, it will be my 40th year completed. And over that time, I've certainly seen a huge improvement in the way that pots are appreciated in this country. And I don't feel that, well, how can I say this? Well, in America, I think pots are appreciated. Pottery is, it seems to me, a very popular area, but I don't think that people in America, the customers, the buyers in America, quite appreciate the amount of work that's involved in making a good pot, and are not yet educated enough to pay a proper price. But that's the responsibility of the potters. The potters need to educate those people and let them know exactly what it is and how much effort, how much time and sheer physical labor is involved in making pots full time, especially the way I do it, and people like me with wood kilns and so on. So that's one difference that I've noticed in answer to Melanie's question. Another difference I feel is that America has a huge advantage over us in that you still have in America a very active ceramic education. In this country, many of our courses, many of our university and college courses in ceramics have collapsed and closed. And there are not that many left, to be honest. Whereas in America, it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that a lot of the major universities have ceramic programs, and a lot of your well-known names in ceramics, people like John Neely, Warren McKenzie, Ron Myers, Randy Johnston, and so on, are all college professors too. And it seems that it's possible in America to have that sort of career where you can be both. Here, that doesn't tend to happen. Those who are in colleges and are professors and are teaching tend not to have a career outside of that educational environment. So in America, it seems to me that you have these very active, very committed ceramic programs in many of your colleges and universities. And that's something we seem not to have anymore. We did have at one time, back in the 60s and early 70s. We were doing really well. There were the courses like Harrow and Chesterfield and Bristol and so on that provided a really good education, and some of the most well-known names who are still around now came out of those courses. People like Walter Keeler, your Bill Van Gilder was a student at Harrow, and people like Jane Hamlin and Sarah Walton, and all of these people are well-known names, and they all studied at Harrow. But that's all gone. And I think that in America, you're very lucky that you've still got these courses available, and there seems to be a huge amount of talent and a huge amount of enthusiasm in those courses, both from the students and from the staff. Look at NSECA, for instance. How many people go there? 8,000 people. I know it's a big country. We don't have anything like that. Another thing that I've noticed on my travels is that in America, you have a huge number of community workshops. And I've given workshops in lots of them. And they seem to be everywhere, where groups have got together, they've fundraised, they've created workshops with the sort of equipment that a lot of colleges in this country would be jealous of. And they've done it all through their own efforts, all off their own bat. I can't think of one of those in this country, not one. And that I find quite remarkable. And I don't know quite how or why that's happened in America. You know, is it sort of a hangover from the old pioneer spirit or something? I don't know, that people actually go out and they create these places for themselves. And we've never really done that in this country. And whilst we do have regional pottery associations, and one or two of them do have small facilities, like a sort of a clubhouse where people do come and gather and make pots, they are, in my experience, nothing like the ones that I've seen in America, with their wood kilns and their gas kilns and rows of wheels. Mudflat in Boston, for instance, is enormous. And I've been to others. I can't pull them out of the top of my head at the moment, but that's another big difference that I've noticed, that in America, people will go out and they will do these things for themselves and get together and create these facilities, where we don't seem to do that in this country. So there's three sort of differences that I've kind of noticed and experienced. I've just had a question in from Jeff Deal. How did you develop your artistic sensibility, and what do you do to keep it fresh and vital? Well, thank you very much. I mentioned earlier on, I've been a potter for 40 years, and when I started, my pots were kind of different in the fact that they weren't very good. And over those 40 years, I feel that I'm largely self-taught. People often ask me about that, and I say that I'm about 95% self-taught. I did a little bit of pottery, ceramics at college, but really not very much. And so once I decided to be a potter full-time, having taught pottery for 3 or 4 years, when you do something every day, all day, you get better very quickly, or you get better, let's say. And if you don't, then you give up and go and find something else to do. So I've I've always had certain interests in ceramics. Well, my dog's come to visit me. I've always had certain interests in ceramics. I've always been interested in medieval and early English slipwares, although I've never made any slipware. I've pretty had an interest in Korean ceramics of the 15th, 16th century for a very long time, long before I sort of actually started making pots that were directly influenced by it. I've quite unashamedly joined I don't want to call it a tradition because I don't think it's old enough to be a tradition, but I certainly had a strong empathy and sympathy for what Bernard Leach wrote about and talked about, and certainly for the work of Hamada Soji. So the way that I went, the path that I took as my career sort of went along, was a result of what I was interested in and what I looked at. And I often say to people at workshops and things that it's not a good idea really to look at other contemporary potters when you're looking for inspiration or influence. And I'm often asked, where do you get your ideas from? The two questions that we're often asked: where do you get your ideas from? Where does the clay come from? Well, if I want to refresh or recharge my batteries, I head for the V&A. Here's my dog. Look. Sorry. I head for the V&A, and I spend a couple of days in the V&A and in the British Museum just looking at old pots, because I think that if you go back in time and look at the old pots and find something there that really affects you, that really turns you on, and then try very hard to not replicate, find your own voice. That's the difficult bit, is finding that little something that gives your pots that individuality, your own voice. But I truly think that if I said to students in the past, if you're really stuck and you can't really move forward, go to a museum, find the one pot that you really, really like, that you would take home with you if you could, and make it. Try to make it. And once you've made it, make it again. And maybe then again. But don't have it in front of you as a photograph or anything like that. And within a very, very short space of time, you will find that pot transforms in some way, that because you're making it, it's your hands, it's your fingers, and it will very quickly become part of you. And that can be the beginning of a thread, of a series, or of a style. So that's kind of where I would go with that, is to look at things from the past, look at where we've come from. Let's look at another question. What have we got here? Does Wales have a pottery tradition? There's no name on this question. Does Wales have a pottery tradition of its own, distinct from Great Britain? If so, does this tradition have any influence on your work? More generally, how does your own culture influence your work, which seems to be influenced by other cultures? And how do you balance such things? Well, the answer to the first two bits is no and no, really. Wales had a slipware tradition in the north, and in the very north and in the very south. And that tradition died out in about 1920, just shortly after the First World War. And both areas, Buckley is a town in the north, which was kind of the Welsh Stoke-on-Trent, and Bridgend, or Ewenny, in the south. Both of these places had potteries from the late medieval right through to 1920. And they supplied slipware, farmwares throughout Wales. and exported them too, to America and to Ireland. And I suppose that they would have, you could say that they were part of the British slipware tradition. And I've never made any slipware. And the only thing I can say about that in terms of its influence on me is a point that I often make in my slide talks, is that I show a slipware plate and I draw attention to the fact that the slipware decoration is very spontaneous, and there's no sign of any hesitancy. It's very direct and very quick, because the potter probably did 50 that day, and he didn't have time to sit and think and be nervous about it. He wasn't thinking about spoiling anything. He was just getting on with it because that's what his father did and what his grandfather did, and so on and so on. And so that is the thing, the one thing that I try to incorporate into my decoration, is that I feel like I have to just do it and hope for the best, and I don't want it to look as though I've been nervous or hesitant. And if I make a mess, whether it's drawing in the clay or wiping my fingers through the glaze or whatever it is, if it looks hesitant, it doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, I wash it off and do it again, or I throw the pot in the bin and pick up another one. And the last part of that question, how does my culture influence your work? Well, that's a tricky one, because I mean, my work, it's quite obvious that it comes out of an Eastern culture, not out of a Western culture. There are elements of Western influence there. I mean, I really like the American settler pots from the East Coast, so there's a little bit of that, especially when I was making salt glaze. But unashamedly, my work is very much influenced. You can see a Hamada there on the shelf behind me. Where am I pointing? There it is, and another one on the top shelf. My work comes out of that tradition, or out of that area of the world, really. And I can't claim that it doesn't, and I wouldn't want to anyway. That's where I am, and that's where I've been for 40 years or so. So I can't see it changing much now. I'm too old. And there are others in this country who are part of that little clique or club or whatever you want to call it. I've mentioned Mike Dodd, Jim Malone, there's Richard Batterham, John Jelfs, Nick Collins. All of these people, we all share that same empathy for high-fired, often wood-fired pots from Japan, China, and so on. What else? Let me see. There was one question here that was, we've got hardly any time left. And there's one question here amongst the questions for everybody, and it's what are the most effective ways to promote your work? I've got 1 minute, so I'm going to say that every potter must devote at least 10% of their time to promoting their work. You can sit like I do on the top of a mountain in Wales making the best pots in the world, and if you don't promote your work and nobody knows about it, you might as well not bother. Use the internet. Use all the free things on the internet that you can think of. Write a book. That's a really good way to promote your name. Right, I'm out of time, so I'm just going to say this. I've been told to say this. Thank you for joining me during this event. Please continue watching throughout the day on the Artaxis Facebook page, and visit artaxis.org to learn more about the 500 artists who have work posted on this website. The next artist coming up will be Modisa Motsomi from Botswana. Thanks for watching. I'll say good night because it's night here. I know it's not in America. And see you again soon. Bye-bye.